And then let's see here. Share. There we go. Okay, I hope everyone had a beautiful Chag. And what caught my eye about this Sefer Ole Yaakov is the way that it's structured. So he's got the Hakdama, he's got the Psicha, the introduction, the preface. Be'inyan dinei mominus meha Torah, meha Gemara, meha Midrashim, me Rishonim va'achronim. Sort of like this is in his introduction, he provides us sort of a general introduction to the laws of monetary matters that you can find in the Torah and in Torah Sheba'al Peh. Hilchot Gezela is what he opens up with first. So Piskei Dinim, Gezela Isura Afilu B'chol Shehu Mikol Adam. He gives us first an introduction of the prohibition, Tam Heter Natilat Davar Muad L'lo Reshut, why it's permitted to take small amounts without permission, Gezela Mikrov, of stealing from your relatives, Isser Gezel Hagoy, the prohibition of stealing from a non-Jew, Hashavat Gezelat Hagoy, returning what you steal from a Gentile, Isser Hata'ayat Hagoy, the prohibition to in any way monetarily deceive a non-Jew, Shliach Ligzela below Yediato, a person who is appointed as a proxy to steal without his knowledge. In other words, he's set up to be part of some kind of scheme, and he doesn't know about it. What are his rights and are his obligations? Mitzvah hashava b'pachas mishava pruta. What if I steal less than a shava pruta? What are my obligations? Ein haganav loka al gzelaso, the laws of lashes. Gozel umitkavin l'shalim tumurat hachefetz, when I steal with the intention to pay later. Chayfetz omid l'mechira, l'sharo katsuv im yachol litlo l'shalim acher kach. If something is for sale, and I want to take it and then pay afterwards, is that permissible? Likro be'iton sheshcheno manui alav. Can I read my friend's newspaper? Te'imotz b'chanut v'harama b'gzela. Tasting things in a store and other deceptive practices of theft. Psuli edus, machmas kseli. Do I become puzzle for edus? Liknot minashim v'yaladim, purchasing from women and children. I don't know why that would have a specific issue. Okay, so you see that he goes through a number of different issues in the laws of stealing. Okay, so it's actually quite an extensive, and then he goes through shilas and shuvas. Starting on page Nun Zayin. And then he, after exhausting the discussion of Hilchos Geneva and Gezela, oh, look, here's got a tshuva on Chutei Tzitzis Mitzemer Gazul, making a tzitzis garment out of when the wool was stolen. Yeah. Wiping your hands on a garment that belongs, or a towel that belongs to your friend when your friend does the same. Is it permissible to use a defective item purchase when your intention is to return it? In other words, I'm going to return this appliance. I might as well get some use out of it while I'm. Yeah. Okay. Tasting an item when you plan on purchasing. Okay. Then he gets into Hilchos Hashava Saveda, which we may end up deciding to skip because we've been through those halachas extensively. Okay. And then what's his next topic? Hilchos Mekach Umemka, and the laws of purchases and sales is the third topic. Let's see. Halamas mum, for example, b'mechor b'schirus, hiding a defect, and when you're selling it. A customer pays for a purchase, doesn't come and pick it up, so I want to put it out in front of my store because I'm closing my store. Am I allowed to do that? And so that he can come pick it up. But it's also creating the possibility that it'll get stolen. Um, if a transaction was performed on Shabbos, is that a binding transaction? Because you're not allowed to make transactions on Shabbos. And then we have Hilchos Hona'ah, which is defrauding someone or overcharging them, right? And then we have laws of Mekach Tos, of erroneous purchases, labor laws. We have laws of proxyship. We have laws of partnership. We have laws of methods of transaction, and we have laws of damages. So it's a pretty extensive sefer. Laws of guardianship. And then he's got a section called Sipurim Uma'amarim, stories and sayings. Story about Rav Chaim Vital. It's not worthwhile to come back in a Gilgal for stealing. That looks interesting. We'll have to look at. We'll have to get to that one. So it looks pretty interesting, covering a lot of things that we've done before. And I think what we'll do is we'll skip this Hakdama because it's a personal Hakdama. And we'll go instead to, let's see how far this goes. Here we have the Inyan, Dine Mominus Mehatorah, Umehamegamara, Umehamidrashim, Umerishonim Da'achronim. Here's his introduction regarding the importance of monetary law that you can find in the Torah, the Gemara, Midrashim, and from Rishonim and Achronim, medieval and later commentaries. Okay, Amru Chazal. So we'll start with this, which is the end of the packet, but I have the second packet as well. Amru Chazal al hapasuk vayomer Elokim lenoach kates kol basar balefanai. Our sages comment on the verse in Parshas Noach that God said to Noah that the end of all flesh has come before me. And so what made God decide to destroy his world? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bo urei kama gadol koach shel Hamas. Come and see how great the power of Hamas is. Now, what is Hamas? Hamas is violence is the way it's translated. But it usually refers to monetary violence, which means people were stealing and grabbing things from each other. Shahar, in other words, it wasn't violence for the sake of gratuitous bloodshed. It was for the purpose of just taking people's things. Shahare dor hamabul avru al hakol v'lo nechtam aleihem gzardinam ad shepashlu yedehem begeza. He says, the generation of the flood violated every imaginable precept, moral commandment, but their seal, the die was cast, or the judgment was sealed when they began stealing from each other. Shenemar ki mala'ah haaretz chamas mipenehem v'hineni mashchisam es haaretz, because the earth, as the pasuk says, God says to Noach, the earth has been filled with Hamas, and it is for that reason that I am destroying the land. So that's what our sages say. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. And so let's expand on that. Vatimalei haaretz Hamas, perish hasfarno, shakulam gozlim ze'ezeh. So the Sforno in his commentary explains that what this means is everyone was just taking from each other. Haba'olim gozlim es ha'aris b'koach. The ha'aris gozel min haba'olim ba'arama. So the landowner would deliberately, openly take the sharecropper's wages, and the sharecropper would use stealth to steal from the employer. Ba'ofen shehaaretz notenet et chol peiroteha legazlanim ulachamsanim, to the point where the earth was giving forth its produce to thieves and to robbers. In other words, I guess everyone was trying to cheat the other. Employers were trying to swindle their employees and were exploiting them. And employees, in turn, were surreptitiously skimming from their employers. Va'amru Chazal, ein ba'al harachamim pogea b'nafashos techila, ela ma'anishim lo la'adam birachusho. He says that the Medrash tells us that the merciful master, referring to God, will not take a person's soul first, but rather will punish an individual with his property first. In other words, if God believes a person is acting wickedly and deserves punishment, he won't afflict him on his person first. He'll first start with punishing him with his wealth. Only when that fails to help to improve the person will a person be punished spiritually as well. So what that means is unclear, because that doesn't work all the time. There are some very, very fine, financially secure people who are stricken with illness and all manner of inexplicable reasons. So it doesn't seem to ring true that this is the method that Hashem uses. We'll put that aside for now. Let's take a look at what the commentaries say. Ubiaru hameforshim kol zeh b'tanai shehamamon nirchash b'drachim kisherot v'hogenot azai hamamon yachol lahatzilet be'alav. So the commentaries say sometimes the reason why you see that this doesn't go in this way is because it's only when a person's wealth was obtained properly will the forfeiture of that wealth serve as a proper atonement to that individual. Ki az yotzei sheha'adam me'abed et mamono v'al yedei kach mekabel et onsho. Because then it turns out that a person is being justly punished by losing the money that he earned properly. Right. And so he's getting properly punished. Shekein amru chazal, ani nechshav kemet. Because our sages tell us that a poor person is like a dead person. Kimavur b'gemara v'chein muvar b'zohar, as is stated by the Gemara in the Zohar. Aval hamamon shuhu gazul ve'ashuk ve'einenu b'chlal kinyano shel ha'adam, ein bekocho lahatzilo me'onesh. But if a person has obtained wealth through stealing and through oppressing others, then it's not really his. And therefore it cannot save him from bodily harm, from bodily heavenly retribution.
Well, wouldn't you think that returning ill-gotten gains would be a form of tshuva? So if he did it himself, that would be helpful, is it? Because
so the argument you're saying is, I stole, but I decide to keep it. So Hashem punishing me by taking it away from me is punishment for the stealing. But what if I deserve, God forbid, punishment for other things that I've done?
Oh, I see.
So God can't use my ill-gotten gains to punish me for that.
Right. Okay.
So you see the point that he's making is that the reason why you might notice that sometimes people will get punished without going through this hierarchy of first their property and then their person is because their property will not properly atone for their other sins because it wasn't theirs to begin with.
For sins other than the stealing.
That's right. Yotzei efo she'ilulei chata ha-gezel v'ha-chamas shechatu bo anshe dor ha-mabul lo hayu nidonim likliya al ma shehishchitu et haaretz be'erva uviznus. So he says that's the correct explanation. I guess he's quoting, or maybe he's expanding on the Sforno. That's the reason why their die was cast for stealing. It's because under normal circumstances, if people were, let's say, licentious in their personal behavior, God would have normally punished them by impoverishing them, taking away their assets, but not destroying them entirely. Okay? However, God could not do that to the generation of the flood, since all of their wealth was from theft. And God says, I can't punish you for your licentiousness with money that's not yours, that's not rightfully yours. And so I have to go straight to punishing you through physical destruction. Kamosha Amru Rabotenu B'Gemara Maseches Sanhedrin Uverashi ala pasuk Vatishachet Haaretz Elatchila Hayu Ne'enoshim B'Ma'u Ma'onom. And so that's the way you understand Rashi and the Gemara. And therefore, if they hadn't stolen, they would have been first punished with their money, because God would normally not punish people directly through their physical harm, but rather through the harm of their assets. But since all of their assets were ill-gotten, they weren't legitimately theirs, Hashem could not resort to that method. V'zehu mashma'uto shel hapasuk osa osher v'lo b'mishpat v'chatzi yamav ya'azven. He says that's also the implication of the verse in Yirmiyahu, which says that if a person accumulates wealth unjustly, it will depart from him half in midlife. Midlife means Dahainu Misha Osa Osher Shalo Bidrachim Kshirot Alav L'Shalem B'Chayav Ba'ad Avonotav Me'achar She'en Kaspo Asui L'Shamesh Kofer Nefesh. When it says he will lose B'Chatzi Yamav Ya'azvenu, God will depart from him midlife, it means that person will die before his time because God cannot use his assets to punish him. Okay, Uvemedrash Tanchuma Darshuch. That so I don't think I've really heard this interpretation before. At least it's not something that comes to memory. This is the proper way of explaining why the generation of the flood were punished specifically because of theft. It's not that God feels that theft is so dastardly that it deserves the death penalty. It's that because people's assets could not protect them, that's why they had to be, because they weren't really their assets, that's why God had to go straight to wiping them out with a flood.
And they had so many other sins.
And they had so many other sins, right? In other words, could you perhaps say that people today are doing many of the same sins that the people of the generation of the flood were doing? Yes, licentiousness in and of itself is not something that warrants utter destruction of humanity. However, because God is unhappy with it, he may bring loss of property because of that. It's only if loss of property is not an option because people do not rightfully own their property. That's why God has to resort to loss of life. That's the system of justice that is being described in these commentaries. Okay.
So there must be also a proportion of that goes on. It's not. I mean, it's unusual for somebody to have total assets that have been stolen, that have been gained from.
Right. So apparently, the generation of the flood, there was such lawlessness.
Right. I understand where he's coming from, but I mean today.
And I suppose you could imagine that in a pre-biblical society.
I mean, cash wasn't.
There was no justice.
Cash wasn't around.
There wasn't cash. There was no monetary system. There was no justice system. It was probably all barter, and people just had an utter disregard, for each other's property.
But don't we also say that the Nafkas stole less than half of this, they wouldn't be chayev?
Right. There is such a midrash. Yeah, but I'm sure we'll get to that when we talk about what the law is when you steal less than a pruta of someone's property.
But it seemed like there was some laws of some sort because they were aware of that.
Yeah, there may have been, it's hard to get a real read on how what commerce was like back then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Uvemedrash Tanchuma darshu chachamenu zal ala pasuk b'parshas Vayikra, daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta alehem, Adam ki akriv mikem korban lashem. It says, speak to Bnei Yisrael and say to them that if a person shall offer from among you an offering to Hashem, lama ne'emar Adam. Why does it specifically say the word Adam? Why, that seems atypical. Normally it should just say, Ko takrivu. This is how you should offer a korban to God. Why does it say when an Adamite or a human being shall offer a korban? Lama, so Ella Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kishetehei makriv lefanai, tehei ke'adam harishon. God is basically saying, whenever you want to bring a gift of your assets to the temple, a korban, make sure that you are like Adam. Shelo haya gozel me'acherim, Adam, anything Adam owned was rightfully his because there was no one to steal from. So you should be like Adam when you offer a korban, that you've made sure that nothing that is within your possession is from ill-gotten gains. Kain teheata lo tiya goza lebria. You too, don't steal from anybody in order to bring a korban. V'lama ki ani Hashem ohev mishpat sonei gezel. I think the way to read it is be'ola or be'avla, because I am God. I love justice, and I hate or I despise theft that is done in a corrupt way, or corrupt theft. V'chein huva b'vayikra rabba uvarashi sham. Adam lamanemar, ma Adam harishon lo ikriv min hagezel, sha'akol hayashalo, afatem lo takriv min hagezel. Slightly different verbiage in another medrash. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Mai dichtiv, and then we have another medrash. What does the pasuk mean in Yeshaya when it says, Ki ani Hashem oev mishpat soni gezel ba'ola, ba'olot sha'atem mevi'en li, ani soni et hagezel sha'atem gozlim otam. The word be'ola means for the burnt offering, meaning that if you try to bring a burnt offering to me, I will despise it if it is obtained through theft, through ill-gotten gains. Even though God says, really, when you think about it, nothing is stolen vis-a-vis God. It makes no difference if it belongs to Reuven or Shimon. Everything belongs to Hashem. But God says, it's not that it's being given to me, that it's stolen and therefore I don't want it or I can't accept it, because it belongs to me anyway. But rather, because it was obtained by you in an offensive way, that's not what I want. Now you can imagine in an incipient religious society, people might be so zealous in their desire to serve their creator that they would disregard certain rules of bein adam lechavero in order to do that. You see this even today.
Yeah.
Some people are so zealous in their desire to do a mitzvah that they'll push or shove in order to get ahead. Okay, so yeah, that's only kiddush, right? Yeah, they're doing it for the mitzvah.
Kohanim on the ramp.
Yeah, that's right. Mashal Melech Basar, the Kohen on the ramp. Great example. Mashal Melech Basar v'dam shahaya over al beit hameches. Amar la'avadav tenu meches l'mochsim. So this can be compared to a king who was one day passing by the treasury of his kingdom. And he says to his servants, to his subjects, make sure you pay the tax to the tax collectors. Amru lo v'halo kol hamechas kulo shelchahu. So, but they said, oh, but your majesty, doesn't all the tax belong to you? Why can't we just give it to you directly? Amar lahem mimeni yilmedu kol overei drachim v'lo yavrichu atzman min hameches. So the king says to his subjects, no, it's important for every citizen of my country to pay their taxes, even though you know. So here the king is speaking to his own personal servants. So his servants are saying, why should we have to pay tax if all the tax ultimately goes to you and we're working for you? We should, there's no need for us to pay tax. So the king says, I want you to specifically set an example for other people. Even though you're my servants and everything that you have already belongs to me, nonetheless, I want passersby who pass through this kingdom to know the importance of paying taxes. Afa Kadosh Baruch Hu Amar, Ani Sone Gezel Ba'ola, Mimeni Yilmedu Bonai V'Yavrichu Atzmim Min HaGezel. God says the same thing. I don't want anyone in the temple bringing something that is from ill-gotten gains, because I want people to learn from the religious sphere of the temple that this is not tolerated in any venue, and so that people will avoid it completely. Okay, so that's a Gemara in Maseches Sukkah. Next, Shalu Talmid of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Mipnei ma hichmira Torah b'ganav yoser migazlan. This one we've covered before. Why is the Torah more stringent upon a ganav over a gazlan? A ganav is a person who steals with stealth, and a gazlan is a person who's a robber who confronts the victim and face to face in broad daylight. Shahagone vesaseh o esashor utvacho o mecharo mishalem el haseh al haseh tashlumi arba ve'al hashor tashlumi chamisha. Because we know that when you steal with stealth, if you steal someone's sheep or someone's ox and you end up slaughtering it or selling it, you have to pay 4 or 5 times the value of that animal. As the Torah says, so Amar Lahen, Zeh HaGazlan, Hishva kavod eved, ahinu adam lichvod kono, shehagazlan gozel hu le'enei abrios v'lo mityarei b'bnei adam kederech shelo yarei me'hakadosh baruch hu. So the answer is, says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, is at least the robber who steals with direct confrontation, it at least places his fear of God on the same level of his fear of man. He doesn't fear either. Avol zeh haganav lo hishva kvod eved lichvod kono kiviyachol osa ayin shalmata ki ilu eno roeh va'ozen shalmata ki ilu ena shomaz. Okay, but this person is placing human honor above God's honor, because he's making it. He through his actions, he is demonstrating his belief that no one's watching from above and no one's listening from above. Elakibed ha'eved yoter mikonu sheyori mibnei adam shaharei mitchabei rak mibnei adam. Person who steals with stealth is more afraid of human beings than he is from God. He's not afraid of Hashem, and he brings a pasuk from this for Yeshaya that when people think no one's watching when I do this Aveir. Okay, so we'll continue this. This is like his ethical introduction. We'll continue that in Mirza Hashem tomorrow, and have a great day, everybody.